Welcome to Lessons from Sessions, a client anxiety case study. So in this little brief video, my intention is to present a client's real case, and show ye the behind the scenes assessment or working out of what it takes to understand the amount of work and the client's capacity for that work for anxiety root cause healing. So if we start this with a brief presentation of the client, so a backstory. Client is a 40-year-old female, has presented herself to previous therapy for the same issue, finds herself looping back into the same difficulty and presents with anxiety, has a diagnosis of generalized anxiety, is currently not on any medication for that diagnosis, had been, is not now, doesn't feel it agrees with, but has had a flare up of anxiety again, and really is very down and depressed and finds it very difficult that she's back in the same place. So when we think about this client's presentation, we understand that there's a back history, that there is a back history of the experience of anxiety. We know nothing else in terms of trauma background or complex trauma or developmental trauma, just that there is a history. The client talks about the inconsistencies, which is why there's a generalized anxiety diagnosis. They talk about the inconsistencies of this anxiety, and that it doesn't seem to have a face or a place or a space. It is a shapeshifter. It can change, and it can be multiple triggers in multiple ways, and that's what's very depressing for the client. The client talks about triggers being TVs, people, conversations, but they all seem to point towards an understanding of catastrophic thinking, catastrophic experiences, or the fear of that. So a lot of things therefore can trigger that client. The client is reporting exhaustion from running away, trying to kind of keep the balls in the air, trying not to have be back in that, if you like, that real deep pain that she associates with this level of anxiety, because in previous experiences it has really brought her to her knees. So the first question that I want to ask is, and we'll ask on any of that, on any of that presentation, is how far away is the client from the possible key and core threat? Now, what does that mean? That means that the model understands anxiety presentation as a threat system that is alive, and that all of the neuroception, perception, proprioceptions, all of the data is warning the client that they're close to the threat. So the first question that I always ask in an anxiety assessment is, how close in awareness is the client from and to the key and core experiences? It is often the case that clients are so far away, that they are so far away both in awareness of what the root cause is, and so far away in terms of the embodiment of root cause. Now, why are those two things different? Because the awareness of root cause is not the embodiment of root cause. So for example, in this client's presentation, there's threads of key and core threat here. There's threads of an internalized threat, which seems to have a catastrophic nature. The client is not in awareness of that, isn't detailing that in her past, and isn't detailing that as a full embodied, re-alivened experience. And what do we know about anxiety? Well, what we know is that the re-experiencing is often the beginning of the reconsolidation. So the gap between the client's presentation and their possible, at this stage, because we don't fully know the possible key and core threat, is very far away. So the next question then becomes, if that gap is big, then there's a lot of work, there's a lot of clinical work to do to bridge that gap so we can park that. The next question then becomes, how much capacity does the client have with the symptomatology of this threat? What does that mean? The symptomatology of a threat is the way in which the unique build of symptoms that belong to this threat, whether it be hyper or hypoarousal, build in the body and present in the body, and how much toleration or tolerance does the client have for that. What we see from this client is that there is an understanding of it, there's an awareness of the experience, which is what has brought her back to therapy, but there is no tolerance. It's the thing that she doesn't want, it's the thing that she's trying to get away from. She doesn't want it now, she doesn't want any trigger, she wants to live a life that is free, and part of that is an intolerance of the symptomatology, which she describes as quite heavy, and also which she describes as powerless too, because it comes out of nowhere. And so that is our first indication. If the gap, the first indication of intervention, so if the gap between where she is in terms of her presentation and her root cause is too wide, then it tells us that we don't start there. The therapeutic process cannot start there, and it would be too difficult to start there. The second assessment, which is really about our symptomatology, tells us that we probably should start here. And when I talk about starting here in terms of interventions, we talk about regulation being part of that intervention, not all of that intervention. And so we have if you like, a team of interventions that we will use here in order to create capacity for the symptomatology in the triggers and then the now. And obviously then that has a knock-on effect to being able to create capacity for root cause. So the next thing that we will assess then is we'll assess the client's capacity to be in their body, to be in the depth of their interoceptive facets. Why? Because we know that the data, we know that the information, we know that, and the science tells us this, that the information for root cause, information for key and core threats is in the body. The mind will make a fool out of you, both the therapist and the client, because it'll ruminate and circle and cycle around storytelling and solutions and solving all sorts of stuff that really is about playing whack-a-mole. So what we have to ask, a very important question, is how much capacity does the client have for body data? And that means how embodied is the client, what's the facets of interoception in the body, what's the detail, what's the depth of the detail in the body. And if that is missing, then that is also a red flag for your intervention hierarchy. So what we really have here is we have fundamentally 4 assessments. How far the client is away from her cause, what's their stage of process, which also includes what's their stage of interoceptive capacities, and what's their capacity for symptomatology. Once you work all of that out and assess all of that, then you have a straight understanding of what you need to do first. For this client, it really is about it's about symptomatology debuild, what's what we call it. Symptomatology regulation, symptomatology capacity. So you want to do all of that foundational work first. And that is foundational. It's not healing work, and we've talked about that in many videos. It's not the healing work, but it is the beginning of healing work, and we want to be able to work with that first. For this client, what was very, very interesting is that the key and core experience was an multiple experience in childhood. She was the child of 2 alcoholics, and there was often a lot of unsafe experiences as a child. And as a result of that, there was an internalization of terror, as you can imagine. And that terror and that fear resulted in an experience of not only severe hyperarousal, up and including panic as a child, but also a sense that everything could be gone in a moment. That was the internalization of the fear. That was the internalization of the limbic energy of the hyperarousal, was an understanding that everything could be gone in a minute. So this client was fundamentally living with that limbic energy in her body for years and years and years, you know, from a child to a 40-year-old adult. And what would happen would be the the world, her environment would give her opportunities to feel the full weight of that limbic energy that she felt as a child. You know, these people, these places, these things, these would give her opportunity to experience. And that's why it felt kind of like it was like trying to catch a mouse, because it had so many kind of explanations that the mind tried to make, and she actually couldn't really understand that the body energy of this was the limbic energy of the child, was the pain of the child, was the terror of the child, was the bigness, and was the prediction of the catastrophic energy, to which she waited every weekend for that as well. So when you understand key, that was the key experience. The threat is related to the key experience, and core threat then is how existential that is to the client. Does that trigger an existential threat and alongside that key experience? And for this client, of course it does. If she's not safe, if there's no one there for her to be safe, and then of course. And so whilst the client, if you think about the presentation and if you think about the assessment, the client was far away from that. But we understand why the client was far away from that, because to try and bring the client into that would be to actually experientially would be to overwhelm her too far, too fast, would be put her back into the place of being a child, where there was nobody there to co-regulate, there was nobody there to step her in, there was nobody there to soothe, to solve, to help her. So if a client is presenting like that and they are so far away from the key and core threat, then there's obviously a reason, and we don't want to overstretch them. We don't want to pull them in too far and too fast. We want to do the proper interventions that stacks the safety protocols that allows deepening prior to overexposure, and that's what happened with this client. So because of that framework, we were able to do the safety work, the regulation work that eventually titrated towards the key and core threat. And once we were in there, once we were able to work in there in a way that didn't re-traumatize, we were able then to, when I say we, I mean me and her, we were able to work together in the corrective experiences that is required, and the correction of the experiences and the correction of the energy, the limbic energy, and the solving and soothing of that at a very direct level. And what we found is that there's absolutely nothing generalized about this anxiety. It's actually incredibly specific, incredibly phenomenological in nature. And when we deal with that, well, we can stop all of those triggers. We can stop all of those places, people, faces, re-triggering that client. That's the lesson in this case study. But in order to get there, we had to go through a series of assessments that allowed us to understand where the interventions were. Hope you find this really helpful. Let me know if you did, and let me know if you have any questions. If you want to dive deeper into this, there is an elongated summit that's attached to this video, and you can spend a few hours with me dissecting many of these small, if you like, breadcrumbs that I've mentioned here that are really important in the treatment of anxiety. I hope to see you on the inside of the summit.